cold breeze enveloped San Diego that year, casting an haunting stillness over the city. Elizabeth Sullivan, a young mother known for her vibrant personality, had disappeared without a trace. The authorities searched diligently, but she remained unfound. Her friends voiced their concerns, and her family rejected the official explanations. Where was Elizabeth Sullivan? Welcome to another episode of No Tears for Black Girls. Today, we examine the case of Elizabeth Sullivan, a young mother who disappeared from Liberty Station in San Diego in 2014. Elizabeth, recently relocated to California with her Navy husband Matthew, left a trail of disturbing clues. As the San Diego Police Department investigated, details of Elizabeth's troubled life surfaced: domestic abuse, prescription drug use, and a secret affair, highlighting a turbulent marriage. Her husband's inconsistent statements and odd behavior added to the intrigue. Was Elizabeth seeking freedom, or was something more sinister at play? Join us as we explore the complexities of Elizabeth Sullivan's disappearance, her husband's arrest, and the discovery that led to his conviction for her murder. This is the story of Elizabeth Sullivan, where love turned fatal. In the fall of 2014, the disappearance of Elizabeth Sullivan sent shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood of Liberty Station in San Diego. The local police immediately suspected foul play, and as days turned into weeks, their suspicions only deepened. Despite pleas from her friends and loved ones, there was little evidence to suggest what had happened to the young mother of two. Elizabeth was not your average housewife. She was a fierce and intelligent woman who had recently relocated to California from Virginia with her husband Matthew, who was serving in the U.S. Navy. Though they were still adjusting to life in a new state, Elizabeth had made a name for herself in the community with her charm, wit, and creativity. But on October 14th, everything changed when she went missing from her spacious home. Her friend Nathan Character was the first to raise the alarm after being unable to reach her for days. He had a gut feeling that something terrible may have happened and shared his concerns with the San Diego Police Department. Elizabeth's husband Matthew, who was back in town between deployments, reported seeing her at home just the day before she disappeared. What could have possibly happened to this capable and well-liked woman? The SDPD vowed to find out. The SDPD Missing Persons Unit was baffled by the disappearance of Elizabeth Sullivan. Her car was still in the garage, but her family home was a mess. As they combed through the clutter, they found nothing that raised suspicion. However, a closer look showed that one of the family's suitcases had gone missing, along with over $1,000 from their joint bank account. Was this a sign that Elizabeth had chosen to leave on her own accord? Desperate for answers, investigators turned to Elizabeth's journals for insight into her life and state of mind. What they discovered were fictional stories filled with romance and adventure, mirroring her own life with her husband Matthew. But as they delved deeper into her fantasies, they couldn't ignore the parallels to her current situation: a woman disillusioned with her white knight and seeking a fresh start. When Elizabeth's phone went silent after a text message sent on October 13th, it set off alarm bells for her friends and family. But Matthew was not surprised by his wife's absence. He revealed to investigators that she had a tendency to become emotionally unstable at times. In fact, just days before reporting her missing, Elizabeth had left the house after an argument with Matthew and never returned. This behavior was not uncommon for her, but it raised red flags for those closest to her. Could there be more to her disappearance than meets the eye? And could her strained relationship with her mother-in-law have played a role in her decision to vanish? These were just some of the questions plaguing investigators as they searched for answers in the mysterious case of Elizabeth Sullivan's disappearance. Matthew paced back and forth, his mind racing with worry. Elizabeth had always come home before, even after their biggest fights. But this time was different. He couldn't shake off the feeling that she wasn't coming back. The investigators were skeptical of Matthew's story. They combed through every detail of Elizabeth's life, trying to piece together what had happened to her. The more they dug, the more disturbing their findings became. They discovered that Elizabeth and Matthew had been living separate lives for years. His time in the Navy had created a rift between them that only grew wider with each long absence. Despite their efforts to maintain a facade of a happy marriage, friends and family knew the truth. And it wasn't pretty. Reports of domestic abuse and police visits to their home painted a grim picture of their relationship. But there was more. Elizabeth had turned to prescription drugs to numb the pain and stress of her crumbling marriage. And then there was her secret affair with a man from Tinder, a stark contrast to her image as a devoted wife and mother. As the pieces fell into place, it became clear that Elizabeth Sullivan was not who she seemed. She was leading a double life, one filled with danger and deceit. And now, she was gone without a trace. The question remained, was it by choice or foul play? On October 19th, the police received a tip that Elizabeth had been spotted at Liberty Station soccer fields. But 2 days later, she was reported missing. The San Diego Police Department told the media that the sighting had been made by 2 off-duty deputies who had been watching their child play soccer. They claimed to have spoken with Elizabeth herself and noticed her disheveled appearance and possible influence of drugs or alcohol. She told them she hadn't been home the previous night and had lost her phone, which they helped her search for to no avail. A week later, there was yet another sighting of Elizabeth near the San Diego International Airport. However, this lead turned out to be false. Despite this, investigators continued to believe the initial eyewitness reports placing her at the soccer fields. Her husband, Matthew, gave an emotional interview to People magazine in November 2014, expressing his constant thoughts and concern for his wife and their children. But friends of Elizabeth noticed that while he claimed to be relying on the support of their Navy community, he was also receiving support from a new girlfriend, whom he would eventually move into their home just months after Elizabeth's disappearance. Despite ongoing searches and efforts from investigators, there were still no signs of Elizabeth Sullivan 10 months after her disappearance. Her case had gone cold, leaving family and friends desperate for answers and clinging on to fading hope that she would one day return home safely. On October 4, 2016, the body of Elizabeth Sullivan was found floating in the channel near Liberty Station, just days before the 2-year anniversary of her disappearance. The San Diego County Medical Examiner determined that she had been brutally stabbed to death, and the case was handed over to the SDPD Homicide Unit. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they discovered that Elizabeth's husband, Matthew Sullivan, had recently moved out of state with his new girlfriend and their expected child. But even more shocking was the discovery of a $1,000 transfer into Elizabeth's personal account right before her death, which remained untouched. Further investigation revealed that she had paid for a divorce attorney and had been having an affair prior to her disappearance. It became clear that tensions between Elizabeth and Matthew had been rising for some time, with separate bedrooms and calls to the police. When Elizabeth admitted to her husband about her affair, and they began discussing custody of their children, Matthew feared she would falsely accuse him and gain sole custody. On the day of her disappearance, he even called 911 to express his concerns. After searching the couple's former home multiple times, police finally uncovered a military-style folding knife with Elizabeth's blood on it in the attic above what used to be Matthew's bedroom. He was arrested in 2018 and extradited back to California from Delaware. However, one peculiar detail continued to baffle investigators. Despite being missing for 2 years, decomposition analysis showed that Elizabeth had only been dead for 2 months. This discrepancy would later become a key factor in the state's case against Matthew Sullivan. The state of California had a strong case against Matthew Sullivan for the murder of his wife, Elizabeth. She had disappeared on October 13, 2014, and her body was never found. During the search of their home, cadaver dogs alerted to a freezer that had been recently emptied. Even though it seemed like an obvious clue, investigators didn't find any concrete evidence linking Matthew to the crime. However, As more details were uncovered, it became clear that Matthew had been keeping Elizabeth's body in the freezer for almost 2 years before disposing of it, just before his move to Delaware. At his trial, Matthew's defense team argued that Elizabeth was unpredictable and often disappeared without telling anyone. They also claimed that there was no real evidence of her ever being kept in the freezer. Despite multiple searches of the home by law enforcement, and even living with his children, mother, partner, and new girlfriend, no one ever discovered Elizabeth's body. There were also conflicting reports from off-duty officers who initially reported speaking with Elizabeth at a park after she had gone missing, but later admitted they may have confused dates. It was eventually confirmed that she had spent the night at a homeless shelter before going missing 2 days later. One potential suspect in Elizabeth's disappearance was her boyfriend, Steve Sutton. He initially refused to cooperate with police and even hired a lawyer. But after being ruled out as a suspect, he finally came forward with information about receiving emails from someone claiming to be Elizabeth. The writer knew personal details about their relationship that only Elizabeth could have known. The state believed that Elizabeth's affair with Steve and her plans to divorce Matthew were the motive behind her murder. Her closest friends testified about the state of her marriage and communication with her husband leading up to her disappearance. Despite overwhelming evidence, Matthew Sullivan vehemently denied any involvement in the death of his wife, Elizabeth, throughout the entire trial. It was ultimately left to the jury to determine if there was enough proof to find him guilty of her murder. Elizabeth had been at home on that fateful night, while her husband Matthew knew about her affair and their impending divorce. His anger and jealousy towards her boiled over into a violent rage. Forensic teams discovered traces of blood throughout the house, with luminol testing revealing a large stain under the carpet, where it was believed Elizabeth had been hiding from her attacker. Further investigation revealed that Matthew had purchased carpet cleaner the day after the murder, trying to cover up his crime. The prosecution argued that Matthew repeatedly stabbed his wife in a fit of fury, then went to great lengths to hide the evidence and clean up the scene. Despite his defense lawyer's pleas for leniency based on his military service and awards, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison for second-degree murder. For those who knew and loved Elizabeth, no amount of justice could bring back their beloved friend and family member. And even though Matthew will be eligible for parole in just a few years, the memory of his heinous actions will never be forgotten by those affected by this tragic case. This is the story of Elizabeth Sullivan's untimely and brutal death at the hands of her own husband. Thank you for tuning in to No Tears for Black Girls. This series is skillfully crafted by acclaimed writer and producer John Reedberg with the guidance of unapologetic host Samantha Paul. Catch new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday on all major podcast platforms. You can listen anywhere, anytime. And if you truly enjoy our content, please leave a 5-star rating and positive review. Remember to stay loved, stay blessed, and stay safe.